us that it's more convenient, right? But that obviously leading to some other problems that we have seen is that one is the pod may shrink and expand in need. Like you, in this pod, let's say, owns certain areas of product. That areas of product sometimes needs a lot more work, sometimes needs less work. And similarly to the other pods. So then you become a little bit challenged because there's no way to have both the visibility and the juggling between them. So how's your experience on this topic, and how do you manage them?
So there's no simple answer to it, but I think it also depends on how the product platform is structured, and it makes it easier if the platform is sort of pod friendly, right? I mean, as we were at PayPal, we were a fairly evolved platform where we could sort of say, hey, risk, merchant services, consumer, working on relatively independent pieces of the business and the code and the process, and they really interfaced in minimal amounts. And while in a smaller organization, that isn't always the case. We're in a situation where platforms aren't that well defined, and it's also you're not dealing with such big teams. And the pods, while they are technically independent, more often than not, they need to spend a lot more time collaborating. And I think it's important here and I hate to use the word process, but I think at some point in time, every single company goes through this aha moment, and you sort of go, well, process isn't a bad word, right? I mean, it's an important part of growth, and it doesn't have to be heavy. It doesn't have to be sort of burdensome to the organization and to the way the organization works, but it's important. It's very, very important. And now, I mean, there are tools that are available today. I mean, Dragonboat's a great example of such a tool, which is available today to help with this process without making it burdensome. And going back to this idea of whether you have 2 or 3 Scrum teams and each of them working together, the way we do it is, we typically do planning, technically, yes, at an annual level, but it's super high level. It's like, hey, what do we think we should be focused on? And we have some very high level plans. And then we look at quarterly is when we start looking at, okay, well, let's look 1 quarter ahead and really start diving into, what we need to actually build, and assigning the work to, well, can it be done by pod A or pod B or team A or team B, and then at what point do the teams need to come together, and building that collaborativeness into that process so that everyone's aware of, hey, you know what, if I'm working on the social module, and there may be some interfaces to the reputation module. Okay, well, great. When that happens, I need to pull that team in, and there may be some work that gets injected here or there. So it is super important to sort of keep that in mind, and having tools that sort of clearly allow you to sort of plan and sort of say, hey, you know what? I've got 6 initiatives. I've broken it down to enough detail, and I know which pod's going to be working on it, which team's going to be working on it. I know when that's going to happen. And then I know, for example, when to pull the teams in without sort of making it burdensome and saying, well, you need to write this doc and that doc, and you need to get it signed off and approved and so on. So I think having that flexibility with tools is super important.
Right, and I think what you said is so true. Obviously, Dragonboat came into the word is because we're facing these problems, and then that's how we ultimately solving the problems with both the people and technology. And obviously, tooling is a part of the technology side of things. So yeah, I really like. I definitely have been to an environment where that. Because it's so difficult to communicate and collaborate and team in different locations. So they've broken things into pods, and then they were so independently operating, and then they don't have a good way to collaborate together. Then you have this like one is like an org chart, right, written over the product, right? You can clearly see this is written this way by a different one because the look and feel, just little nuances not connect together. And the other part is you create a lot of tech debt, because in the ideal world, I want to work with this team to get things together, but because we didn't align the direction and roadmap and priority, and we couldn't get their support, because they have their focus, then we end up just work around our code and write a bunch of stuff and try to make it happen. So over time become a, not only just a better user experience because the org chart all over, also it's just not, the tech debt over time just really, like, people don't realize tech debt is, and people don't realize tech debt a lot of times is a product induced, not really engineering induced, right? It's called a tech debt, but it's really product decision leading to it.
Yes, and it's usually introduced by the need for speed, right? It's like, well, and this is the whole, again, going back to this question around how do you sort of build, so we introducing process to solve very specific challenges rather than for process's sake, right? So I think that's super important, because ultimately, when you're small, and most companies now, most startups and even upstarts or scale ups, we all work agile. But what agile allows you to do and enables you to do is exactly what you said. It's like, well, it's all about testing and learning. Everyone from the board down to the product manager wants, it's like, hey, let's test and learn and see if it works. And then you're right, that's how you introduce tech debt, because it's like, well, hey, it's just a test. Well, let's just figure out how to get this test out there. And we're like, well, do you really want to spend 4 sprints building this hook, or do I want to spend 3 days just building a workaround? And then you have this over and over again, and you go, oh, you know what, this actually worked. Now let's iterate, let's grow it. So every time you test and learn and iterate, and then all of a sudden you have a product and you find you have fit, but then you realize you also have a mountain of debt.
Right.
And yes, absolutely. I think that's the one thing that I think a big distinction between a startup and as a company that's a bit further along in its maturity is we can't afford to introduce that much debt. We've got to be careful about it and plan for it.
I think you're spot on.